Route 66 doesn't forgive loneliness. The old highway stretches across New Mexico like a forgotten promise, 2 lanes of cracked asphalt cutting through high desert where the horizon shimmers in waves of heat by day and goes black as ink by night. In 1989, before the interstate made it obsolete, Route 66 still carried travelers, long-haul truckers, adventurous tourists, and people running from something they couldn't name. Tucumcari, New Mexico, population 6,800, sat at the intersection of Route 66 and the middle of nowhere. The town existed because travelers needed gas, food, and rest before facing another 200 miles of desert emptiness. By night, Tucumcari's neon signs glowed like beacons in the darkness, motels with names like Blue Swallow and Desert Air, their vintage signs promising color TV and air conditioning. And at the eastern edge of town, where Route 66 bent toward the Texas border, stood the Starlight Diner. The Starlight had operated continuously since 1952, chrome and turquoise exterior, red vinyl booths inside, a long counter with spinning stools, and a jukebox that still played Patsy Cline if you fed it quarters. The coffee was always fresh, the pie was homemade, and the place never closed. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, someone was always working at the Starlight. Truckers knew it. Locals knew it. Anyone who drove Route 66 regularly knew that when everything else in Tucumcari rolled up at sunset, the Starlight's neon sign still glowed red and blue against the New Mexico night. On the evening of October 12, 1989, 22-year-old Maria Elena Santos clocked in for the late shift at 10 p.m. She tied her brown hair back with a turquoise ribbon that matched the diner's exterior, adjusted her white apron over her uniform, and poured herself a cup of coffee before the dinner crowd thinned out completely. Thursday nights were usually quiet, a few truckers, maybe a couple driving through, the occasional insomniac local looking for pie and conversation. Maria had worked at the Starlight for 3 years, ever since graduating from Tucumcari High School in 1986. She was saving money for nursing school at Eastern New Mexico University in Portales, 60 miles south. Her tip jar at the counter held crumpled dollar bills and loose change, and she kept a spiral notebook under the register where she tracked her savings. $4,200 so far. She needed $6,000 to cover her first year. By spring 1990, she'd have enough. The regulars loved Maria. She remembered how everyone took their coffee, never forgot to ask about children or grandchildren, and had a smile that made the long hours on Route 66 feel less lonely. Her co-worker and best friend Linda Chavez often worked the day shift, and they'd overlap during the 10 p.m. transition, catching up on town gossip, while Linda counted her tips and Maria prepped for the quiet overnight hours. That Thursday night, Linda lingered a few extra minutes, sitting at the counter, while Maria refilled salt shakers and wiped down tables. They talked about nothing important, a movie playing at the drive-in theater, plans for Halloween, Linda's boyfriend's broken transmission. At 10:23 p.m., Linda grabbed her purse, waved goodbye, and pushed through the glass door into the October night. The bell above the door chimed. Maria waved back, her reflection visible in the darkened window glass. Linda would replay that moment for the next 34 years, the way Maria smiled, the turquoise ribbon in her hair, the casual wave. It was the last time anyone who loved Maria Santos saw her alive. By 10:45 p.m., the dinner stragglers had cleared out. An elderly couple finished their chicken fried steak and left a $3 tip. A trucker hauling refrigerated goods drank 2 cups of coffee, paid his check, and headed back to his rig. The diner was empty except for Maria, who used the quiet time to restock napkin dispensers and prep the coffee station for the midnight to dawn rush that sometimes materialized when multiple trucks converged on Tucumcari at once. At 11:07 p.m., according to the timestamp on the credit card receipt, later recovered from the register, a customer entered the Starlight Diner. The bell above the door chimed. Maria looked up from the coffee station, smiled her waitress smile, and said what she always said, "Welcome to the Starlight." "Sit anywhere you like, honey. I'll be right with you." The customer was male, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, a denim jacket despite the mild October temperature, and work boots worn at the heels. He chose a booth near the back, away from the windows, sliding into the red vinyl seat with his back to the wall. Maria grabbed a laminated menu and a glass of ice water, approaching the booth with her order pad already out. The security camera mounted above the register, a grainy black and white system installed after a robbery in 1987, captured Maria walking toward the back booth at 11:08 p.m. The angle didn't show the customer's face, just the back of his baseball cap and the bulk of his shoulders. Maria stood at the table for approximately 2 minutes, her body language suggesting she was taking his order, writing in her pad, making the small talk that good waitresses master. At 11:10 p.m. she returned to the counter, clipped the order ticket to the kitchen wheel, and started a fresh pot of coffee. The security footage shows her moving through familiar motions, filling the coffee maker, checking the pie display, glancing back at the booth where her customer waited. She appeared calm, unhurried, going about her work the way she had 1,000 times before. At 11:18 p.m., Maria carried a plate to the back booth. The footage shows her setting it down, standing for a moment, probably asking if he needed anything else, then returning to the counter. She poured a cup of coffee, black, and carried it back to the booth at 11:19 p.m. She refilled it once more at 11:34 p.m. At 11:52 p.m., the man in the baseball cap approached the register. The security camera finally captured a partial view of his face. White male, heavy-set, mustache, approximately 40 to 50 years old. He wore sunglasses despite the late hour, the fluorescent diner lights reflecting off the dark lenses. He paid in cash, exact change, leaving a single dollar bill on the counter for a tip. The receipt showed his order: cheeseburger, fries, 2 cups of coffee. Total, $6.47. He paid with a $10 bill, received his change, and left that dollar for Maria. At 11:54 p.m., the bell above the door chimed as he exited. Maria was visible on camera, wiping down the booth where he'd sat, collecting the dirty dishes. She carried them to the kitchen, disappeared from view for 30 seconds, then returned to the counter area. At 11:58 p.m., Maria was still visible on the security footage, standing at the register, counting bills. The overnight shift officially began at midnight, and she was performing her routine end-of-evening tasks even though she'd be working until 6 a.m. She appeared to be alone in the diner. At 12:03 a.m. on October 13, 1989, the security camera recorded something unusual. Maria looked toward the front door, her expression changing from neutral to mildly concerned. She walked toward the door, moving out of the camera's frame. For 42 seconds, the camera captured an empty diner, just the counter, the stools, the pie display case, the coffee station. At 12:04 a.m., the front door opened. The bell chimed. A figure entered, impossible to identify from the camera angle, but clearly male, clearly large. The footage quality was poor, the figure backlit by the parking lot lights. He moved quickly, purposefully, out of frame toward where Maria must have been standing. At 12:04 and 18 seconds, there was movement near the edge of the frame, quick, violent, unclear. Something fell. The audio on the security system was broken, had been for months, so there was no sound. Just silent footage of an empty diner and something happening just beyond what the camera could see. At 12:05 a.m., the figure moved back across the frame toward the front door, fast, carrying something or someone. The bell chimed as the door opened. At 12:06 a.m., the diner was empty again. The lights still blazed. The coffee maker still burbled. The register drawer was closed. Everything looked normal except for one detail, visible in the grainy footage. Maria's order pad lay on the floor near the door, pages scattered. The Starlight Diner's security camera continued recording an empty restaurant for the next 2 hours and 17 minutes. At 2:23 a.m., a trucker named Robert McMahon pulled his Peterbilt into the Starlight's parking lot. He'd been driving since Albuquerque, was running on schedule, and needed coffee before pushing through to Amarillo. The neon sign glowed. The lights were on. Everything looked normal. McMahon pushed through the front door, the bell chimed, and called out, "Hello? Anybody working?" The diner was silent. He walked to the counter, looked around, called out again. Nothing. The coffee maker was still on, the pot half full, but burnt-smelling from sitting on the burner too long. Dirty dishes sat in a gray plastic tub near the kitchen door. The register was closed. McMahon walked behind the counter, something he'd never normally do, and peered into the kitchen. Empty. He checked the bathroom. Empty. He went back outside, looked around the parking lot. Maria's 1983 Chevy Citation was parked in its usual spot near the dumpster, where employees always parked to leave the close spaces for customers. The car was locked. Nothing appeared disturbed. Something felt wrong. McMahon had been driving Route 66 for 15 years, stopped at the Starlight dozens of times. The diner was never empty. Someone was always working. He walked back inside, found the phone behind the counter, and at 2:31 a.m. called the Tucumcari Police Department to report an abandoned diner with the lights on and no staff present. Officer Daniel Ortega arrived at 2:47 a.m. He'd been patrolling the east side of town, had passed the Starlight earlier, around midnight, had seen it open and operating normally. Now he walked through the same empty diner, his boots echoing on the black and white checkered floor. He noted the burnt coffee, the scattered order pad pages near the door, the employee car in the lot. Ortega used his radio to call it in. At 3:05 a.m., Sergeant Tom Brennan arrived. By 3:30 a.m., they'd contacted the diner's owner, Harvey Goldstein, who lived 6 blocks away, and answered his phone on the 4th ring, groggy with sleep and confusion. By 3:55 a.m., Goldstein was standing in his diner, looking at the scene with growing dread. "Maria was working tonight," he said. "Maria Santos, sweet girl. Never misses a shift, never leaves early. Where is she?" That was the question no one could answer. Maria Santos had simply vanished from a brightly lit diner in the middle of her shift, leaving behind her car, her purse, found in the back office, with her wallet, keys, and $78 in tip money still inside, and a mystery that would consume Tucumcari for more than 3 decades. By 4:30 a.m., Sergeant Brennan had called Maria's parents' house. Her mother, Carmen Santos, answered on the 2nd ring, her voice tight with the instant panic that comes when police call in the middle of the night. By 5 a.m., Carmen and her husband Roberto were at the diner, looking at their daughter's purse, her car, asking questions no one could answer. She wouldn't leave, Carmen kept saying, her hands shaking as she held Maria's order pad, recognizing her daughter's handwriting on the scattered pages. She had nursing school saved up. She had plans. "Where is my daughter?" By dawn on October 13, 1989, the Starlight Diner had become a crime scene. Police tape stretched across the entrance. Tucumcari's small police department, just 8 officers covering the entire town, began processing what little evidence existed. The New Mexico State Police were called in by 8 a.m. The FBI's Albuquerque field office was notified by noon. The investigation began with the obvious question: what happened between 12:04 a.m., when Maria walked toward the front door, and 2:23 a.m., when Robert McMahon found the diner abandoned? The security footage was reviewed dozens of times. The figure who entered at 12:04 a.m. was male, large, moved with purpose, but the camera angle and poor quality made identification impossible. Was it the same man who'd eaten the cheeseburger at 11:52 p.m.? The timeline suggested yes. He'd left, then returned 12 minutes later. Why? Maria's personal life was examined thoroughly. She had no boyfriend, no ex-boyfriend with a grudge, no secret relationships. Her parents described her as focused, driven, careful with money, excited about nursing school. She didn't drink, didn't use drugs, didn't run with any crowd that might lead to trouble. Linda Chavez, her best friend and co-worker, confirmed everything. Maria was exactly who she appeared to be, a hard-working, small-town girl saving for college. The trucker angle became the primary focus. Route 66 carried hundreds of truckers through Tucumcari every week. Most stopped at the Starlight at least once. The man who'd ordered the cheeseburger had paid cash, left minimal evidence. But there was one crucial piece of evidence that would prove critical 34 years later: the coffee cup. When police processed the booth where the baseball cap customer had sat, they found his dishes stacked neatly: plate, silverware, and a white ceramic coffee mug with a turquoise Starlight logo. The mug had been refilled twice, and on its rim, barely visible, was a slight smudge of moisture from lips. In 1989, DNA analysis was in its infancy, not routinely used by small police departments in rural New Mexico. But Sergeant Brennan, who'd taken a forensics course the previous year, had learned about the emerging technology. "Bag that cup," he told the evidence technician. "Don't wash it. Keep it exactly as is." The coffee mug went into evidence storage at the Key County Sheriff's Department, cataloged, sealed, and preserved. At the time, no one knew how important it would become. The search for Maria Santos began at dawn on October 13th and mobilized Tucumcari with the fierce urgency that defines small towns when one of their own goes missing. Within hours of the sun rising over the high desert, over 200 volunteers had gathered at the Starlight Diner's parking lot, organizing into search teams that would comb every inch of Route 66 from the Texas border west to Santa Rosa, a 60-mile stretch of highway, and the endless emptiness on either side. The New Mexico State Police deployed tracking dogs at 9 a.m. The German Shepherds were given Maria's uniform shirt from her locker to establish scent, then released in the diner's parking lot. The dogs circled, noses to the asphalt, and immediately moved toward the front entrance of the Starlight. They followed an invisible trail to the spot where Maria's car was parked, circled it twice, then sat down. The trained signal that the scent ended there. Whatever had happened to Maria, she'd been taken away in a vehicle. Search teams divided the area into grids. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through the scrub brush and mesquite that surrounded Tucumcari, looking for any sign: clothing, belongings, disturbed earth. The October heat climbed toward 85 degrees by noon. Searchers drank water from ice chests donated by local businesses and kept walking. They checked abandoned buildings along old Route 66, the decaying motels and gas stations that had closed when Interstate 40 opened in 1981 and pulled traffic away from the mother road. Sheriff's deputies interviewed every employee at every business along Route 66 within a 20-mile radius. Had anyone seen Maria? Had anyone noticed unusual activity between midnight and 2 a.m. on October 13th? The answers were uniformly negative. Route 66 at midnight was dark and mostly empty. Truckers passed through. A few insomniacs drove to Tucumcari from surrounding ranches. But no one had seen Maria Santos. The trucker investigation became all-consuming. New Mexico State Police contacted truck stops, way stations, and dispatch offices across the Southwest. They compiled lists of every trucking company whose drivers regularly used Route 66. They requested logs showing which trucks had passed through Tucumcari on October 12th and 13th. The paperwork was staggering: hundreds of trucks, thousands of drivers, incomplete records, and a transportation industry that in 1989 still operated largely on handshakes and handwritten logs. FBI Special Agent Catherine Walsh arrived from Albuquerque on October 14th. She'd worked dozens of missing persons cases and knew the statistics. The first 48 hours were critical. After that, the likelihood of finding Maria alive dropped dramatically. After a week, it dropped to nearly zero. Walsh set up a command center in the Tucumcari Community Center and began coordinating the multi-agency investigation with the methodical precision of someone who understood they were racing against time. The security footage was sent to FBI labs in Quantico, Virginia, for enhancement. In 1989, video enhancement technology was primitive compared to what would come later, but technicians did their best. They produced clearer still images of the baseball cap customer, though his face remained partially obscured by the hat brim and sunglasses. The images were distributed to truck stops, police departments, and media outlets across the Southwest. A composite sketch was created based on the enhanced footage and the few details visible. White male, heavy build, approximately 5 feet 10 inches to 6 feet tall, 200 to 220 pounds, dark mustache, aged 40 to 50. The sketch appeared on the front page of the Albuquerque Journal, the Santa Fe New Mexican, and the Amarillo Globe News. It aired on local television news. Tips began flooding in, dozens, then hundreds. Each tip required investigation. A trucker matching the description was spotted at a truck stop in Flagstaff, Arizona. State police tracked him down. Wrong man, solid alibi. A woman in Amarillo called to report her ex-husband, who wore a baseball cap and had worked as a trucker in the late 1980s. Investigators interviewed him. Wrong mustache, wrong build, had been in Oklahoma on October 12th. A psychic from Taos called to say she'd had a vision of Maria buried near a specific exit on Interstate 40. Volunteers searched the area. Nothing. The coffee cup sat in evidence storage, its potential not yet fully realized. DNA testing existed in 1989, but it was expensive, time-consuming, and rarely used outside of major metropolitan police departments. Key County, New Mexico, had neither the budget nor the expertise. The cup was preserved, photographed, documented, and stored with a hope that someday, somehow, it might yield answers. Robert McMahon, the trucker who'd discovered the abandoned diner, was interviewed extensively. He'd been cooperative from the start, providing his logbooks, his route history, his employment records. He'd passed through Tucumcari dozens of times, always stopped at the Starlight, knew Maria by face, if not by name. But on October 12th, he'd been in Albuquerque until 10 p.m., then driven straight through to Tucumcari, arriving at 2:23 a.m. His timeline was verified through fuel receipts and way station records. He was cleared completely. Harvey Goldstein, the Starlight's owner, provided employee records and tried to remember every customer who'd been a regular over the years. The diner had been in his family since his father opened it in 1952. Harvey had grown up wiping tables and refilling coffee. He knew the rhythm of Route 66, knew which truckers stopped every Tuesday or every other Friday. But there were so many faces, so many transient customers passing through once and never returning. How could he remember one man in a baseball cap who'd eaten a cheeseburger on a Thursday night? Linda Chavez blamed herself. If she'd stayed later, if she'd worked the overnight shift instead of Maria, if she'd been there. The logical part of her brain knew it wasn't her fault, but grief and guilt don't respond to logic. She attended every search effort, walked miles of desert, put up missing person posters on every telephone pole between Tucumcari and Amarillo. Maria's face on those posters, her high school graduation photo, smiling, hopeful, became a haunting presence along Route 66. Carmen and Roberto Santos did what parents of missing children do. They refused to give up. Carmen quit her job as a teacher's aide at Tucumcari Elementary to focus entirely on finding her daughter. Roberto, who worked at the Tucumcari Rock Museum, took only the shifts necessary to pay bills. They spent every other waking hour organizing searches, calling police departments, contacting media outlets. They turned Maria's bedroom into a command center, walls covered with maps, timelines, photographs, and the desperate paperwork of a search that produced leads, but no answers. By December 1989, 2 months after Maria's disappearance, the active search efforts had largely ceased. Volunteers had walked hundreds of square miles. Police had interviewed over 300 people. The FBI had followed up on more than 400 tips. But Maria Santos remained missing, and without a body, without a crime scene beyond the abandoned diner, without witnesses who'd seen anything conclusive, the investigation had nowhere left to go. The case went cold, but it never closed. Agent Walsh returned to Albuquerque but kept the file on her desk. Sergeant Brennan, who'd been first to treat the diner as a crime scene, continued to work the case on his own time. And Carmen Santos continued her solitary search, driving Route 66 in her aging Honda, stopping at every truck stop and diner from Albuquerque to Amarillo, showing Maria's photo to anyone who would look, asking if they'd seen her daughter. The years passed with the peculiar cruelty that time inflicts on families of the missing. Unlike families of murder victims, who endure terrible grief but eventually receive closure, the Santos family lived in permanent limbo. Was Maria alive somewhere, held against her will? Was she dead, her body hidden in the vast New Mexico desert? Should they mourn? Should they hope? The uncertainty was its own form of torture. 1990 came and went. Maria would have turned 23. She would have started nursing school. Carmen bought a birthday cake anyway, put 23 candles on it, and let them burn down to nothing in Maria's empty bedroom. 1991 passed. Then, 1992. Route 66 was officially decommissioned in some sections, though Tucumcari's stretch remained navigable. Interstate 40 carried most of the traffic now, and the old highway towns struggled. The Starlight Diner stayed open. Harvey Goldstein couldn't bring himself to close it, though business had declined. Some people avoided it, creeped out by the disappearance. Others stopped specifically because of it, gawking at the booth where the baseball cap man had sat, as if proximity to tragedy held some morbid fascination. In 1995, 6 years after Maria vanished, there was a break, or what seemed like one. A trucker named Dale Hennigan was arrested in Arizona for the murder of a prostitute in Phoenix. During questioning, Hennigan mentioned he'd done things in New Mexico in the late 1980s. Police across the Southwest perked up. Agent Walsh, still carrying Maria's case, drove to Phoenix to interview Hennigan. She brought the composite sketch, the security footage, and 6 years of desperate hope. Hennigan was the right age, the right build. He'd driven Route 66 regularly in 1989. He wore baseball caps. He had a mustache. When Walsh showed him Maria's photo, he smiled, not recognition, just the smile of a man who enjoyed watching a detective grasp at straws. "Never seen her," he said. "But she's pretty." "Was she pretty when you found her body?" "Oh, wait, you didn't find a body, did you?" Walsh wanted to hit him. Instead, she spent 2 days interviewing him, cross-referencing his trucking logs from 1989, trying to place him in Tucumcari on October 12th. But Hennigan's employer records showed he'd been hauling furniture from Los Angeles to Dallas that week, a route that didn't take him through New Mexico. Way station records confirmed it. He wasn't the man from the Starlight. The false lead devastated Carmen Santos. She'd allowed herself to hope, and hope's betrayal left her hollowed out for months. But she didn't quit. She couldn't. Maria was out there somewhere, and a mother doesn't stop searching. In 1998, DNA testing had advanced significantly. The FBI's CODIS database, Combined DNA Index System, had launched in 1994, and by the late 1990s, police departments were beginning to submit old evidence for testing. Sergeant Brennan, now a lieutenant, remembered the coffee cup. He contacted Agent Walsh. Together, they petitioned Key County for funding to have the DNA extracted and tested. The county commission approved $2,500. In early 1999, the coffee cup was sent to a private lab in Albuquerque. Technicians swabbed the rim where lips had touched, extracted epithelial cells, and isolated a DNA profile. It was partial, not perfect, degraded slightly by 10 years in storage, but it was usable. The profile was entered into CODIS. No hits. The man who'd drunk coffee at the Starlight Diner on October 12, 1989, had never been arrested for a crime serious enough to require DNA submission. His genetic code sat in a database, waiting, but with no match to compare it against. It was just data. The millennium arrived. Maria Santos had been missing for over a decade. She'd be 33 years old now if she was still alive. Carmen Santos was 54, her hair gone gray, her face lined with the particular aging that comes from sustained anguish. Roberto had suffered a heart attack in 2001, stress-related, the doctor said, though they didn't need to specify the source of that stress. He survived but moved slower, tired more easily. The Starlight Diner changed hands in 2002. Harvey Goldstein retired and sold the business to a couple from California who'd romanticized Route 66 without understanding its ghosts. They renovated, updated the menu, tried to attract tourists, driving the old highway for nostalgia's sake. But Maria's disappearance still hung over the place. The new owners eventually put up a small memorial plaque near the booth where she'd last been seen, in memory of Maria Santos, 1967 to 1989, never forgotten. The question mark after 1989 was telling. They didn't know what year to put. She might still be alive, probably wasn't, but no one knew. Agent Walsh retired from the FBI in 2006. She'd never solved the Maria Santos case, and it haunted her. On her last day, she made Lieutenant Brennan promise to keep the case active, to never let it go completely cold. Brennan, now graying himself and considering retirement, promised. He meant it. The 20th anniversary of Maria's disappearance arrived in October 2009. Local media ran retrospective pieces. The Albuquerque Journal published a long feature. 2 decades later, Route 66 mystery remains unsolved. The article included updated age progression photos showing what Maria might look like at 42, lines around her eyes, mature face, hair that might be graying. Carmen Santos was interviewed, her voice steady, but weighted with 2 decades of unanswered questions. "I still set a place for her at Christmas," Carmen said in the article. "I know she's probably gone. But until someone tells me for certain, until I can bury my daughter and say goodbye, I can't stop. I won't stop." The article generated a few new tips, none productive. The case remained cold. The coffee cup remained in evidence storage, its DNA profile floating in CODIS, waiting for a match that never came. More years passed. 2010, 2011, 2012. Lieutenant Brennan retired in 2013. The Starlight Diner closed permanently in 2015, not enough business to sustain it, and Route 66 had become more museum piece than functioning highway. The building sat empty, its neon sign dark, graffiti appearing on its turquoise walls. Carmen Santos drove past it sometimes, looking at the abandoned diner where her daughter had worked her last shift, and wept. By 2020, 31 years after Maria's disappearance, only a handful of people still actively thought about the case. Carmen Santos, now 73 and struggling with arthritis that made driving difficult. Roberto, who'd suffered a second heart attack and spent most days in a wheelchair. Linda Chavez, who'd never worked as a waitress again, and still had nightmares about that Thursday night shift. And a young detective in the Key County Sheriff's Department named Jennifer Martinez, who'd grown up hearing about the Maria Santos case and had always been haunted by it. Detective Martinez had been 11 years old in 1989, living in Tucumcari when Maria vanished. She remembered the searches, the missing person posters, the way the whole town had held its breath, waiting for news. When she joined the Sheriff's Department in 2015, one of the first things she did was request the Maria Santos case file. The file was thick, boxes of reports, witness statements, dead-end leads, and photographs. Martinez read every page. She studied the security footage, which had been converted to digital format in the early 2000s. She reviewed the DNA profile from the coffee cup. And in 2020, during the COVID-19 lockdowns, when the world slowed down and cold case detectives found extra time to review old files, Martinez learned about something new: forensic genealogy. The technique had broken cases like the Golden State Killer in 2018. Instead of relying on CODIS matches to known criminals, forensic genealogy used DNA uploaded to public databases like GED Match by people researching their family trees. A DNA profile from a crime scene could be compared against thousands of civilian profiles looking for relatives, cousins, second cousins, distant family connections. From there, investigators could build family trees, narrowing down suspects. Martinez contacted Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in forensic genealogy. In December 2020, She arranged for the DNA from the coffee cup to be analyzed using their services. The cost was $3,500, most of it paid through a GoFundMe campaign that Linda Chavez organized and that raised funds from across Tucumcari. People remembered Maria Santos. People still cared. The DNA was submitted. And then came the waiting. Forensic genealogy wasn't quick. It required painstaking analysis, family tree construction, and verification. But for the first time in 31 years, there was real hope. Carmen Santos, now 74 and in declining health, got the phone call from Detective Martinez in January of 2021. "We're using new technology," Martinez explained. "We might finally get answers." Carmen cried. She'd waited 31 years. She could wait a little longer. The DNA sample from the coffee cup arrived at Parabon Nanolabs in Reston, Virginia, on January 18, 2021. Dr. Ellen Graytack, the company's director of bioinformatics, handled the case personally. She'd worked on dozens of cold cases, using forensic genealogy, had helped identify the Golden State Killer, had turned genetic data into justice. But each case still felt personal, especially the old ones, where families had waited decades for answers. The DNA profile from 1989 was partial. 31 years in evidence storage, even properly preserved, had taken its toll. But it was workable. Graytack's team extracted autosomal DNA markers and prepared them for upload to GEDmatch, a public genealogy database where people voluntarily shared their genetic data to find relatives and build family trees. In March 2021, the profile was uploaded. Within hours, the system had identified potential matches, distant relatives whose DNA showed genetic overlap with the unknown man from the Starlight Diner. The closest match was a fourth cousin, meaning they shared a set of great-great-great-grandparents. It wasn't much, but it was a starting point. Forensic genealogy is detective work translated into family trees. Graytack's team began building the genetic family tree backward in time, using the fourth cousin match as an anchor. They consulted census records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, obituaries, and immigration documents. They traced lineages through public records that dated back to the 1800s, looking for the common ancestors who connected the fourth cousin to the man who'd drunk coffee in Tucumcari in 1989. The work was painstaking. Every branch of the family tree had to be verified, every generation confirmed. A single error early in the tree could send the investigation down a completely wrong path. Graytack's team worked methodically, spending weeks constructing what grew into a sprawling genealogical map with hundreds of individuals spanning 5 generations. By May 2021, they'd identified the common ancestors: Wilhelm and Greta Hoffmann, German immigrants who'd arrived in Pennsylvania in 1883. The Hoffmanns had 7 children. Those children spread across America: Pennsylvania, Ohio, Nebraska, Texas, California. Each child had children of their own. The family tree branched and branched again. The genealogists worked forward through time, following each branch, identifying every descendant of Wilhelm and Greta Hoffmann who was alive in 1989. They were looking for a white male, aged 40 to 50 in 1989, which meant born between 1939 and 1959-1949. They were looking for someone who lived in or traveled through New Mexico, someone who might have had reason to be at a Route 66 diner at midnight on a Thursday. By July 2021, the family tree contained over 300 individuals. The genealogists had narrowed the pool of potential suspects to 23 men of the right age and gender. Each one had to be investigated. Where did they live in 1989? What did they do for work? Did they have connections to New Mexico or Route 66? Detective Martinez received the list in August 2021. 23 names, 23 men who could be the person who'd walked into the Starlight Diner on October 12, 1989, and walked out with Maria Santos. Martinez divided the names among investigators. Each name required background checks, employment verification, location confirmation. It was tedious work, but it was progress. 18 of the 23 were eliminated quickly. Wrong location, living in Maine or Florida or California with no travel to New Mexico. Wrong occupation, accountants, teachers, factory workers with no reason to be on Route 66. Wrong physical description, too tall, too short, no mustache, wrong build. That left 5 men, 5 possibilities. Each one required deeper investigation. Candidate number 1, James Hoffman, born 1943, lived in Albuquerque in 1989. Physical description matched. But James had died in 1997, and his family had records showing he'd been in the hospital for surgery on October 12, 1989. Eliminated. Candidate number 2, Robert Hoffman, born 1941, worked construction in Texas. Physical description, close but not exact. Investigation showed he'd been working a job site in Houston in October 1989, with timesheets proving his presence. Eliminated. Candidate number 3, David Hoffman, born 1946, salesman for agricultural equipment, traveled throughout the Southwest. Physical description matched. This one looked promising. Martinez spent 2 weeks investigating David Hoffman's life in 1989. But David's sales records showed he'd been at a conference in Phoenix on October 12th and 13th, with hotel records and colleague witnesses confirming it. Eliminated. Candidate number 4, Carl Hoffman, born 1948, worked in IT for a company in Denver. Wrong profession for Route 66 travel. Physical description didn't quite match. Investigation showed Carl had never worked as a trucker, never driven commercially. Eliminated. That left candidate number 5, Tommy Hoffman, born March 14, 1942, in Omaha, Nebraska. And this one was different. Tommy Hoffman had worked as a long-haul truck driver from 1967 to 2006, nearly 40 years on the road. His employment records showed he'd driven for Prairie Star Transport, a regional company that hauled goods across the Southwest. His regular routes included runs from Amarillo to Albuquerque, from Oklahoma City to Phoenix, routes that took him straight through Tucumcari on Route 66. Physical description: white male, 5 feet 11 inches, heavy build, dark hair, mustache. In 1989, Tommy Hoffman would have been 47 years old. The security footage showed a man approximately 40 to 50 years old. It fit. Detective Martinez pulled Tommy Hoffman's driver's license photo from 1989. She compared it to the enhanced security footage from the Starlight Diner. The resolution wasn't good enough for a definitive match, but it wasn't a definitive exclusion either. The build was right. The mustache was right. The age was right. She dug deeper into Tommy Hoffman's life. Born in Omaha to Frank and Dorothy Hoffman, descendants of Wilhelm and Greta's 3rd son. Tommy had 2 siblings, both deceased. He'd married young, divorced in 1975, no children from the marriage. He'd worked the same trucking job for decades, lived modestly, kept to himself. In October 1989, according to Prairie Star Transport's archived records, Tommy Hoffman had been assigned a route: deliver machine parts from Amarillo, Texas, to Flagstaff, Arizona. The route would have taken him directly through Tucumcari on Route 66. The delivery date was October 13th morning arrival, which meant he would have been driving through Tucumcari late on October 12th or early on October 13th. The timeline fit perfectly. Martinez's pulse quickened as she read the records. This was it. This had to be it. But she needed more than circumstantial evidence. She needed something definitive. She researched Tommy Hoffman's current status. He'd retired from trucking in 2006 at age 64. His last known address was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he'd moved to be closer to his brother's family after his brother's death in 2005. His brother's widow, Margaret Hoffman, still lived in Tulsa. Martinez made phone calls. She contacted the Tulsa Police Department, requested assistance. She learned that Tommy Hoffman had died on February 8, 2022, just 3 months earlier. He'd been 79 years old, died of congestive heart failure in a Tulsa nursing home. Dead. The suspect was dead. Martinez felt the familiar frustration of cold case work, getting close only to have justice slip away through mortality. But she didn't give up. There was still something to pursue: Tommy Hoffman's family. Tommy had no children from his marriage, but he'd had a son out of wedlock in 1969. The son's name was Daniel Hoffman, born April 1969 to a woman named Rachel Sims. Tommy had paid child support, but had minimal contact. Daniel had been raised by his mother in Oklahoma City, had taken her maiden name for a while, eventually reclaimed Hoffman. He was 53 years old in 2022, living in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, working as an auto mechanic. Martinez contacted Daniel Hoffman in May 2022. She explained she was investigating a cold case from New Mexico, that his father's DNA had come up in a genealogy search, and she needed to verify information. Daniel was cooperative, but confused. He barely knew his father. They'd met maybe a dozen times in his entire life. Tommy had been distant, sent money, but never showed up for birthdays or graduations. "What did he do?" Daniel asked. "I can't discuss details yet," Martinez said. "But I need to ask, did your father ever talk about Route 66? About New Mexico? About anything that happened in 1989? Daniel thought for a moment. "He didn't talk much about anything. But I remember when he was dying, I visited him in the nursing home in February. He was in bad shape, knew he was dying. He wanted to talk, wanted to get things off his chest. He was going on about his life, his regrets. And he said something weird." Martinez's hand tightened on the phone. "What did he say?" "He said, 'I did things on the road. Bad things. Things I can't take back.' I asked him what he meant, but he got agitated, confused. The nurses said it was the morphine talking. He died 2 days later." Martinez felt ice in her stomach. "Did he say anything specific? Any names? Any places?" "He mentioned New Mexico. He said, 'I left her there. I'm sorry.' Then he started crying. I'd never seen my father cry. It freaked me out. I didn't know what he was talking about. I thought he meant my mom, like he regretted leaving her when I was a kid. But now you're calling, asking about New Mexico in 1989? Daniel Hoffman's voice trailed off. Martinez could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, putting pieces together. "Did my father kill someone?" Daniel asked quietly. Martinez chose her words carefully. "We're investigating the disappearance of a young woman from Tucumcari, New Mexico, in October 1989. Your father's DNA was found at the scene. We believe he was there that night. His deathbed statement suggests he may have information about what happened to her." There was a long silence. Then Daniel Hoffman said, "I'll help however I can. If he did something terrible, I want to know. That woman has a family. They deserve answers." Over the next several months, Martinez worked with Daniel Hoffman to piece together Tommy Hoffman's final confession. The deathbed statement hadn't been recorded, just witnessed by a son who hadn't understood its significance until now. But combined with the DNA evidence, the employment records, the timeline, and the circumstantial evidence, it painted a clear picture. Tommy Hoffman had been driving from Amarillo to Flagstaff on October 12, 1989. He'd stopped at the Starlight Diner around 11 p.m., ordered a cheeseburger and coffee, sat in the back booth. Maria Santos had waited on him. He'd watched her work, young, pretty, alone in the diner. When he paid his check at 11:52 p.m., he didn't leave. He sat in his truck in the parking lot, watching through the windows. At 12:04 a.m., when he saw the diner was empty except for Maria, he went back inside. Maybe he intended to rob the place. Maybe he intended something worse from the start. Whatever his intent, when Maria confronted him, asking if he'd forgotten something, probably smiling that waitress smile, something in Tommy Hoffman snapped. There was a struggle, brief, violent. Maria fought. Tommy was bigger, stronger, and had the element of surprise. He overpowered her, dragged her out the front door, the bell chiming, and into his truck. He drove east on Route 66, drove until he found a spot far enough from town, somewhere in the vast New Mexico emptiness where screams wouldn't carry. The details of what happened next were things Martinez could only infer from the evidence and from the patterns of similar cases. Maria Santos died that night, somewhere in the desert between Tucumcari and the Texas border. Tommy Hoffman buried her in a location only he knew. Then he continued his route to Flagstaff, delivered his load on time, collected his pay, and drove back through Tucumcari 3 days later as if nothing had happened. He'd gotten away with it. For 33 years, he'd gotten away with it. He'd continued driving Route 66, continued living his life, carried the secret of what he'd done to Maria Santos until morphine and death loosened his tongue enough to confess to a son who barely knew him. In August 2022, Detective Martinez presented her findings to the Key County District Attorney. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. DNA match from the coffee cup, employment records placing Tommy Hoffman at the scene, timeline alignment, physical description match, and the deathbed confession witnessed by his son. The DA reviewed the case carefully. Tommy Hoffman was dead, couldn't be prosecuted, couldn't stand trial. But there was still value in announcing the findings, in giving the Santos family closure, in solving a case that had haunted Tucumcari for over 3 decades. On October 12, 2022, exactly 33 years after Maria Santos disappeared, Detective Martinez held a press conference. Carmen Santos sat in the front row, her husband Roberto beside her in his wheelchair, both of them holding hands, bracing for whatever they were about to hear. Martinez stood at the podium, took a deep breath, and began. In October 1989, 22-year-old Maria Elena Santos disappeared from the Starlight Diner in Tucumcari. For 33 years, her family and this community have searched for answers. Today, I can announce that through advanced DNA analysis and forensic genealogy, we have identified the person responsible for Maria's disappearance and presumed death. The room was silent. Cameras clicked. Reporters leaned forward. The DNA recovered from evidence at the Starlight Diner in 1989 matches Thomas Hoffman, a truck driver who passed through Tucumcari regularly on Route 66. Mr. Hoffman died in February 2022, but before his death, he made statements to family members that corroborate his involvement in Maria's disappearance. While we cannot prosecute Mr. Hoffman due to his death, we can definitively say that he was responsible for what happened to Maria Santos on October 13, 1989. Carmen Santos collapsed into tears. Roberto held her, his own face streaked with tears. After 33 years, they finally knew, not the answer they wanted. Nothing could bring Maria back, but the answer they needed. The uncertainty was over. Martinez continued. We are now working to determine the location where Mr. Hoffman buried Maria's remains. We're examining his trucking routes, consulting geographical experts, and pursuing every lead. Our goal is to bring Maria home so her family can finally lay her to rest. The press conference lasted 45 minutes. Martinez answered questions, provided details, showed the enhanced security footage that had haunted investigators for decades. She thanked the DNA analysts, the genealogists, the community members who'd never forgotten Maria Santos. That evening, the story went national. CNN, NBC, CBS. They all covered it. 33-year-old cold case solved through DNA and deathbed confession. The story of Maria Santos, the Route 66 diner, and the truck driver who'd stolen her future captured national attention the way cold case breakthroughs often do. But for Carmen and Roberto Santos, the media circus didn't matter. What mattered was sitting in their living room that night, looking at Maria's photograph, and finally being able to say, "We know. We know what happened. We know who took you, and everyone else knows too." The announcement that Tommy Hoffman was responsible for Maria Santos's disappearance brought answers, but it also brought new questions. The most urgent: where was Maria's body? Where had Tommy Hoffman buried her on that October night in 1989? Detective Martinez assembled a team to analyze Tommy Hoffman's trucking routes. Prairie Star Transport had kept detailed records, delivery manifests, route logs, fuel receipts. On October 12, 1989, Tommy had filled up his truck at a Texaco station in Tucumcari at 10:47 p.m. before stopping at the Starlight Diner. His next documented fuel purchase was in Tucumcari again on October 15th, 3 days later, after completing his Flagstaff delivery and returning east. But somewhere between leaving the Starlight Diner around 12:05 a.m. on October 13th and arriving in Flagstaff later that morning, Tommy Hoffman had taken time to bury Maria Santos. The question was, where? The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted. Profilers reviewed the case and offered insights based on patterns from similar crimes. Truck drivers who committed murder along their routes typically disposed of bodies within 20 to 30 miles of the crime scene, far enough to avoid immediate detection, close enough not to deviate significantly from their schedule or route. They looked for isolated areas, places they were familiar with, locations where disturbance of Earth wouldn't immediately attract attention. Route 66 between Tucumcari and the Texas border offered countless such locations. The high desert stretched endlessly on both sides of the highway, arroyos, abandoned homesteads, ravines, and vast stretches of emptiness where a person could dig a grave under cover of darkness and no one would notice. In November 2022, Martinez led a search operation focusing on areas within 30 miles east of Tucumcari. Ground-penetrating radar teams surveyed areas identified as possible burial sites, places where the earth showed old disturbances, where scrub brush grew differently, where the desert landscape suggested something had been buried decades ago. The search was complicated by 33 years of erosion, vegetation growth, and landscape changes. What might have been a fresh grave in 1989 would look like natural terrain by 2022. But the teams persisted, using cadaver dogs, radar technology, and systematic grid searches. Daniel Hoffman joined the search effort. He'd grown up without his father, barely knew the man, but felt a moral obligation to help find what Tommy had hidden. He drove from Oklahoma to New Mexico, walked the desert with search teams, tried to think like a truck driver looking for a quick place to hide evidence of a crime. He would have pulled off Route 66 somewhere, Daniel said, standing on the shoulder of the old highway looking out at the scrubland. Somewhere he could see if another vehicle was coming. Somewhere he could work fast. He had a delivery to make. He couldn't spend all night digging. Maybe 20 minutes, 30 tops. In December 2022, 6 miles east of Tucumcari, near an abandoned ranch house that had collapsed decades ago, cadaver dogs alerted on a spot beneath a cluster of juniper trees. The trees were old, at least 40 years, which meant they'd been there in 1989. The location was 200 feet from Route 66, accessible by a dirt road that trucks could navigate. Ground-penetrating radar showed an anomaly 3 feet below the surface, a depression in the soil density consistent with disturbed earth that had settled over time. The FBI's evidence recovery team was called in. On December 18, 2022, they began careful excavation. Carmen Santos waited at home in Tucumcari. She was 75 years old now, her health fragile, her heart weakened by 33 years of grief. Roberto sat with her, holding her hand, both of them afraid to hope and afraid not to. Detective Martinez had promised to call as soon as they found anything, or confirmed they'd found nothing. The excavation took 6 hours. The team worked carefully, documenting every layer of soil, every item encountered. At a depth of 31 inches, they found fabric, deteriorated, discolored, but identifiable as synthetic material consistent with a Waitress uniform. At 34 inches, they found skeletal remains. The forensic anthropologist on site, Dr. Sarah Chen, from the New Mexico office of the medical investigator, examined the remains in situ. Female, approximate age 20 to 25, height consistent with Maria Santos's 5'4" frame. The skeleton was largely intact, curled on its left side in what's called a flexed position, the way a body would settle if it had been hastily buried. Dr. Chen found something else, a turquoise ribbon, partially preserved by the dry desert soil, still tangled in the cervical vertebrae, where it had been tied in hair. Carmen Santos had described that ribbon to investigators 33 years ago. Maria had been wearing it when she left for work on October 12, 1989. At 4:47 p.m. on December 18, 2022, Detective Martinez made the phone call she'd been preparing for. "Mrs. Santos, we found her. We found Maria. She's coming home." Carmen Santos collapsed into her husband's arms, sobbing, not tears of sadness, though there was sadness, but tears of relief so profound it felt like something physical breaking loose inside her chest. For 33 years she hadn't known where her daughter was. Now she knew. Maria had been 6 miles away all this time, sleeping under juniper trees in the New Mexico desert she'd grown up in. The remains were transported to the office of the medical investigator in Albuquerque. DNA testing confirmed what everyone already knew. The skeletal remains belonged to Maria Elena Santos. Dr. Chen's examination revealed the cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with being struck with a heavy object. Maria had been murdered, not just abducted. She'd died quickly, at least. That was the only mercy in the entire terrible story. In January 2023, the Key County District Attorney held a second press conference. While Tommy Hoffman couldn't be prosecuted posthumously, the case was officially closed. Maria Santos's death was ruled a homicide. Thomas Hoffman was identified as her killer. The case file, which had remained open for 33 years and 3 months, was finally marked, solved. But there was one more legal proceeding. Under New Mexico law, victims' families could pursue wrongful death civil suits against the estates of deceased perpetrators. Tommy Hoffman had died with a modest estate, a small house in Tulsa, some savings, a pickup truck. It wasn't much, but it was something. Carmen and Roberto Santos, with pro bono legal representation from an Albuquerque firm, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Tommy Hoffman's estate in February 2023. Daniel Hoffman, as executor of his father's estate, didn't contest it. In fact, he supported it. "My father destroyed your family," Daniel told Carmen and Roberto when they met for the first time in March 2023, in a courthouse conference room in Tucumcari. "I can't undo what he did. I can't bring Maria back, but I want you to have whatever he left behind. It's the least I can do." The civil case proceeded quickly. In May 2023, a judge awarded the Santos family $250,000 in damages, the full value of Tommy Hoffman's estate. The money didn't matter to Carmen and Roberto. What mattered was the legal acknowledgement, the official record that said Thomas Hoffman murdered Maria Santos and he was responsible. But there was something else Daniel Hoffman wanted to give them. After his father's death, while cleaning out the Tulsa house, he'd found a box in the attic. Inside were items that didn't belong to Tommy. A woman's wristwatch, a small gold crucifix on a chain, a waitress's name tag that read Maria, and photographs. Dozens of photographs of the Starlight Diner taken from a truck cab through the windows, showing a young woman working inside. Tommy Hoffman had kept trophies. He'd watched Maria for weeks, maybe months, before the night he finally acted. The photographs dated back to August 1989, showing Maria through different shifts, different angles, always unaware she was being watched. It was chilling evidence of premeditation, of obsession, of a predator stalking prey. Daniel turned everything over to the police, and the police gave the items to Carmen Santos. The watch had belonged to Maria, a Timex with a white leather band she'd received for her 21st birthday. The crucifix had been her grandmother's, worn daily. Carmen held these objects, returned after 34 years, and wept for the daughter, who'd never had a chance to take them off herself, to put them safely in her jewelry box at home. On June 17, 2023, Maria Elena Santos was finally laid to rest. The funeral mass was held at Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church in Tucumcari. The same church where Maria had been baptized, had received First Communion, had dreamed of someday getting married. The church was packed, not just with family and the few remaining friends from 1989, but with people who'd followed the case for decades, who'd searched the desert, who'd never forgotten the girl who'd disappeared from the Starlight Diner. Linda Chavez, now 56 years old, delivered a eulogy. She spoke about her best friend, about the dreams Maria had, about the nursing school she'd never attend, about the life that was stolen. She spoke about 34 years of wondering, and the relief of finally knowing, and the anger that still burned that someone could do this and walk free for so long. Maria should have lived, Linda said, her voice breaking. She should have become a nurse. She should have gotten married, had children, grown old. All of that was taken from her by a man who saw her as something less than human, something he could use and discard. But Maria was human, she was loved, she is loved, and she will never be forgotten. Maria was buried in Tucumcari Memorial Park under a cottonwood tree with a headstone that finally had complete dates: Maria Elena Santos, April 8, 1967, October 13, 1989. Beloved daughter, cherished friend, forever missed. Carmen Santos died 11 months later, in May 2024, at age 76. The doctor said it was heart failure, but everyone who knew her understood it was more than that. She'd held on long enough to find her daughter, to bury her properly, to know the truth. Once that mission was complete, once she'd done everything a mother could do, her body finally gave permission to let go. She was buried next to Maria, mother and daughter reunited at last. Roberto Santos lived another year, passing away in June 2025 at age 79. He'd spent his final years visiting 2 graves instead of 1, talking to his wife and daughter, bringing flowers every Sunday after Mass. When he died, he was buried on Carmen's other side, the 3 of them together, under the cottonwood tree. The Starlight Diner building, abandoned since 2015, was purchased by the Tucumcari Historical Society in 2024. They restored it as a museum dedicated to Route 66 history and to Maria Santos's memory. The booth where Tommy Hoffman sat on October 12, 1989, is preserved behind glass, with a plaque explaining what happened there. The counter where Maria worked is restored to its original condition, and on the wall, near the cash register, hangs a photograph of Maria, young, smiling, wearing her turquoise ribbon, with text below it. Maria Elena Santos worked at the Starlight Diner from 1986 to 1989. She was a devoted daughter, a loyal friend, and a young woman with dreams of becoming a nurse. Her life was taken by violence, but her memory remains. This museum stands as a reminder that every victim of violence was a real person, someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone who mattered. May we never forget Maria Santos, and may we never stop fighting for justice for those who cannot fight for themselves. The museum opened in October 2024 on the 35th anniversary of Maria's disappearance. Visitors come from across the country, drawn by the Route 66 nostalgia and stayed by Maria's story. They sit in the restored booths, look at the vintage jukebox, and read about a young waitress who went to work one Thursday night and never came home. Detective Jennifer Martinez received a commendation from the New Mexico Attorney General in 2024 for her work solving the Maria Santos case. She'd spent nearly 4 years pursuing a case that most people had given up on, had believed in forensic genealogy when it was still relatively new, had refused to let Maria Santos become just another forgotten missing person. "I did it for Carmen," Martinez said when she accepted the award. "I did it for Roberto. I did it for every family who's ever waited for answers that never came. And I did it for Maria, who deserved better than to disappear into the desert without anyone knowing why." Daniel Hoffman still lives in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. He thinks about his father sometimes, about the man he barely knew, about the monster hidden behind a truck driver's routine. He wonders if he could have known, if there were signs he missed, if things could have been different. But mostly, he thinks about Maria Santos, about the photograph he saw of her smiling behind the Starlight Diner counter, and about the life his father stole. He donated the money from his father's estate to a scholarship fund established in Maria's name at Eastern New Mexico University. Every year, a nursing student receives the Maria Santos Memorial Scholarship, $6,000, the exact amount Maria had been saving. The first recipient was a young woman from Tucumcari who, like Maria, had dreams of healing people. Route 66 still runs through Tucumcari, though most travelers take Interstate 40 now, racing past without stopping, without seeing the small town where neon signs still glow at night, and history still whispers from every corner. But those who do stop, those who take the old highway and pull into what's now the Starlight Diner Museum, learn about a young woman named Maria Santos, who represents something larger than one tragedy. She represents every person who went to work and never came home, every family who waited for answers that took decades to arrive, every case that seemed unsolvable until new technology, new techniques, and new determination broke through the silence. For 34 years, Tommy Hoffman thought he'd gotten away with murder. He'd buried Maria in the desert, continued his roots, lived his life. But DNA doesn't forget, science doesn't forgive, and families don't stop searching. In the end, justice came for Tommy Hoffman the way it comes for many cowards, too late for prosecution, but not too late for truth. The world knows what he did. His name is attached forever to the word murderer. And Maria Santos, who existed in limbo for 34 years, finally has a grave where people can come and say, "We remember you. We fought for you. You mattered." On October 12th every year, the Starlight Diner Museum holds a remembrance ceremony. People gather at sunset when the neon sign glows red and blue against the New Mexico sky. They light candles. They share stories about Maria, about Route 66, about the importance of never giving up on the missing. And at exactly 11:52 p.m., the time Tommy Hoffman paid his check and walked out the door, someone rings the bell that used to hang above that door, the same bell that chimed when Maria's killer left and returned. The bell rings out across the empty parking lot, across the high desert, across time itself. It rings for Maria, and for every victim who waited too long for justice. It rings as a promise: we will not forget, we will not stop searching, we will not let your story end in silence. Maria Elena Santos was 22 years old when she disappeared from the Starlight Diner. She should have turned 58 this year. She should have been a nurse, a mother, a grandmother. She should have grown old watching sunsets over the New Mexico desert she loved. Instead, she rests beneath a cottonwood tree in Tucumcari Memorial Park, finally home, finally at peace. And the desert she was buried in, the highway she worked beside, and the diner that became her last known location all stand as testaments to a simple truth. Time may pass, killers may die, but justice, like the desert itself, endures, patient, waiting, inevitable. Maria Santos is home, and her story, once lost in the darkness of Route 66, now shines as brightly as the Starlight Diner's neon sign, a beacon for every family still searching, still waiting, still hoping that someday, somehow, their loved one will come home too.